this is one of my favorite things of the whole time is when the people are still coming to the afternoon. I love it. Book Festival is my favorite time of the year. I'm Wendy Hudson. I'm one of the co-founders of the Nantucket Book Festival and the chief bookseller at Nantucket Book Partners, which is Mitchell's and Bookworks. So, of course, that would be my favorite time of year, right? We're gathered now to hear what I know will be a captivating conversation with Ben Mezrich and Linda Henry. I know firsthand how great this is going to be. Ben Mezrich is the reigning cowboy of narrative nonfiction. He's the author of 25 books that are major international bestsellers, including, but not limited to, Bringing Down the House, Dumb Money, and The Accidental Billionaires, which spent 18 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and was adapted into the critically acclaimed movie The Social Network. His most recent book is Breaking Twitter, Elon Musk and the Most Controversial Corporate Takeover in History. Got that right. He has created his own fantastic genre, cinematic, unputdownable, true stories of young geniuses battling their way through the gray areas between right and wrong and succeeding at all costs. We're so happy to welcome Ben back to the Nantucket Book Festival. And Linda Henry, as Mary Bergman said this morning, of course, is the CEO and co-owner of Boston Globe Media, a dynamic multimedia organization that includes the Boston Globe, Boston.com, Stat News, and my personal favorite, the Harvard Bookstore. She's a 4-time Emmy Award-winning television producer, Emmy-nominated documentary producer, and my personal favorite, a children's book author. Please join me in welcoming Ben Mezrich and Linda Henry.
Wendy, thank you so much. And I just want to give a huge thank you to the Nantucket Book Foundation, because this is just a wonderful, wonderful gift to bring the literary community here on Nantucket together. I've been involved in other book festivals, and this one has just been spectacular. And the fact that it is free and open to everyone, and it just brings in these top authors, it is a gift. So thank you. And welcome, Ben, to Nantucket.
Thank you so much. And again, what Linda said, thank you. This is such a wonderful book festival. I think I was here in 2016, and I remember it well. And thank you, Linda, for doing this. You're amazing. And
okay, so Ben and I have been friends for over 17 years, so you are going to get a very unfiltered conversation. I know
she knows everything about me.
All of the stuff, so I'm gonna get the good stories out of him. And starting with the fact that he started as a vineyard guy. He and his wife, beautiful wife, Tanya, who's here today, they got married at the vineyard. We understand that, but they're spending a little bit more time on Nantucket. I think we're gonna convert them.
You'll win us over. We love it here. So yes. But yeah, thank you. And I know Linda does know me probably better than most people. So she's seen my career develop from a very long time ago. So I think we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Okay, so I'm gonna start sort of broad. You have created your own style, like in terms of the types of characters that you portray. How would you describe for your nonfiction books? What type of character are you drawn to?
I mean, I'm drawn to sort of usually young people who take on the system, people who live in the gray area between right and wrong, and they are not so good with authority, and often they do something that changes the world. There's usually a lot of ambition and greed and things like that, but I'm really looking for characters. They're not criminals. They're people who kind of push the boundaries and do things that make them rich often, but that isn't usually the purpose. It's usually to change something. And so I've often written about people that live much more scary and exciting lives than I do, and I live vicariously through them. So I look for characters that the writing will be pushing me out of the place that I normally am into a world that I don't know anything about.
One of the things that I think is really inspiring about you as a writer is the number of times that you were rejected.
Yeah.
And so we talk about...
Not just in writing, by the way, but you can see my wife. I was rejected an awful lot in regular life as well.
So the number of times that you just kept trying. You kept trying in writing, you felt it in you, you kept trying, and you were about to give up.
Yes.
So can you take
us back to those wonderful romantic days of sitting in this little apartment in Boston. I graduated from college and knew I wanted to be a writer. I've wanted to be a writer since I was...
Harvard.
Went to Harvard.
So I went school in Cambridge.
Little school in Cambridge. And I wanted to be a writer since I was 12 years old. My parents had a rule when we were little that we had to read 2 books a week before we were allowed to watch TV. And I became a speed reader because I wanted to watch television. And so when I graduated from college, I locked myself in an apartment in Boston, beneath a dental office in the Back Bay. You could still walk by there. And I wrote 9 novels in 1 year, which I don't recommend to anybody. And the reason I did this is my dad had said to me, I'll give you 1 year where I won't let you starve. And if you don't make some sort of movement forwards in writing, you got to go to law school. And I really didn't want to go to law school. Not to any lawyers out there, I'm sure it's wonderful, but I just wasn't for me. So I locked myself up in an apartment, and I wrote literally 40 pages a day, straight for a year. And I would send them out and get rejection, send them out, get rejection. And I got 190 rejection slips that year. And I would tape them to my walls like a serial killer. And I'd sit in the middle of all of this rejection and just was so determined that I would get somewhere in that year. And I just wouldn't give up. And I did manage to get an agent by the end of that year. And I sold my first book the year after. So,
was that enough for your dad?
Well, no, I will say, and to be fair, nobody read that book. I sold 3 copies of it. I actually sold, before Bringing Down the House, which was the MIT blackjack story, which I became known for, I had written 6 books that had been published, 9 books that hadn't been published. So Bringing Down the House was my 16th written book. And I was 25, maybe. And basically, the first book came out, 3 people read it, and my mom bought 2 of the 3 copies. And then another book came out, and it became a TV movie called Fatal Error, which was horrible, and I hope none of you ever see it. It stars Antonio Sabato Jr., the underwear model, if you remember Antonio, and he plays a surgeon, which was like really believable casting. I didn't know surgeons did so many sit-ups in between their patients, because that's what Antonio would do. And I remember watching that movie with my dad, who is a doctor, and there's a scene where Antonio is leaning over the patient's chest, and he goes, "We've got a subdural hematoma." And my dad says, "You know that's in the head, right?" So I was writing like garbage pop sci-fi fiction. And then I ran into this group of MIT kids hanging out at a bar called Crossroads in Boston, which a lot of you might know. If any of you went to MIT, you've probably been to Crossroads. And they were regular MIT kids, but they had tons of money. And it was all in $100 bills. And in Boston, you never see $100 bills. So I just started hanging out with them, and I was like, "Why do you have so much money?" And they invited me to go to Vegas with them, and that led to Bringing Down the House, which completely changed my life. So before that came out, I had written many books. I was massively in debt. I was $2 million in debt as a 26-year-old. Yeah, it's not good when there's an IRS agent who like shows up at your apartment. and I was in a bad place, and I actually had a stack of business school applications under my bed because I thought the only way I'm ever going to get out of this hole is to go to business school. So my parents were not thrilled until Bringing Down the House, but it was all I ever wanted to do, and so I was just going to get there.
You also did the writer experience very well in order to get yourself into that level of debt, but.
Yes, I lived crazily. I wanted to live like my heroes, which were like Hemingway and Bret Easton Ellis and Jay McInerney and sort of the writers set from New York. And so I lived as if I was one of my characters for a number of years, and it didn't really run in the right.
But you got there.
Yeah.
And so the first book, which sort of launched you on this sort of this incredible journey of having this niche type of story to tell. Was Bringing Down the House, which is the story of kids who figured out a way to beat the system. They figured out how to beat the odds of blackjack and win in Vegas more often. And since that came out, and that was also your first time, not only was it a success in terms of selling books, it was a success in terms of a movie.
Yes, it became a movie. So I always wanted to write books that became movies. So some writers want to win Pulitzers, some writers want to win National Book Awards. My dream was always a paperback book that said on it, "Now a major motion picture." It was really, and I know at a book festival that might be a little sacrilegious to say, but the reality is, to me, I always saw the book as part of it, and then the movie would be another part of it. And so what happened with Bringing Down the House is I wrote, it was going to be this little book. It had a first printing, it was going to be 12,000 copies, which at the time was a very small first printing. Nowadays, that's not that small first printing, but back then people read a lot of books. And I was sitting at home, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and it was Kevin Spacey. Now, nowadays, that wouldn't be a great phone call, right? Things changed a lot.
Especially in Nantucket.
I know. My mom is like, can you take that part out of what your talk? You don't really need to talk about it. But Kevin called me up, right? And he said, I want to make this into a movie. And it was this kind of crazy moment. He was the biggest actor in the world at the time. He had read an article I wrote for Wired magazine about the MIT blackjack team. And it took many years. It wasn't like instantly we had a movie. But it really did change the course of my life because my connection to Hollywood began there. And that movie ended up being a very big movie. It's a long time ago now, but 21 was a big film. And it sort of planted me as the guy Hollywood could go to if they need something written quickly, because I write a book in 3 months, and it's timely. So if a news story breaks, that's where kind of this cycle started, where people would start calling me. But yes, it was a life-changing moment for sure.
And so this book really launched you after years of struggle, and I think it's really wonderful that you tell the story and you share the part of how it was really hard for a number of years, and it was a difficult, painful process, but you kept going, and you became successful. And now stories come to you.
Yeah.
In a really interesting and fun way.
Yeah.
And so I want you to, talk to us a little bit about your writing process, and then talk to us about how you politely get yourself out of stories that other people think you should write.
Yeah. So basically, and it started early on. I actually had a phone. There used to be phone books, right? And I actually had a phone that people could find the number to, so that anytime something happened, people would call it. I called it like the red phone, the secret phone. And I would get pitches every day into the night, dozens and dozens of pitches every day, often from prison. But whenever anybody did something crazy, I would get a phone call or an email. And I kind of presented myself as the guy you could call if something crazy had just happened in your life. And that's essentially how the social network happened. Basically, in the middle of the night, I got an email at 2 a.m. from a kid at Harvard. And he said, my best friend founded Facebook and no one's ever heard of him. And I'd heard of a guy named Mark Zuckerberg. This was like 2006, 7. Facebook had really just started. And I went out for a drink, and in walked Eduardo, if you've seen The Social Network. He was the other guy, and no one had ever heard of him because he'd been cut out of the Facebook story. And he proceeded to tell me this crazy story. He sat down, and he just started the conversation by saying, Mark Zuckerberg effed me. There's like kids in the audience, so I'm gonna, you don't know what that means. And as a journalist, I said, tell me more. And he proceeded to tell me this crazy story. And I wrote a book proposal, just a 12-page proposal, which I called Face Off, which was a horrible title, by the way, because there was already a movie called Face Off.
Hockey movie?
I sent it to my agent, and it leaked onto the internet. So my book proposal leaked onto Gawker.com. Remember that website? And that day, crazy things happened. Facebook settled with Eduardo to keep him from talking to me for $5 billion. And I've seen the settlement agreement, and it's for $5 billion, and the first line of it is, you may never speak to Ben Mezrich again, because they were trying to stop this book from being written. And the same day, Aaron Sorkin saw my book proposal on Gawker and called up my agent and said, I want to write this as my next movie. And the same day, hour later, David Fincher read the same thing, called up my agent and said, I want to direct this as my next movie. And this was all incredible news, except I actually hadn't written a book. All I had was a 12-page book proposal, having sat down with Eduardo. So I had nothing. And so I literally...
And now Eduardo had $5 billion.
Yeah, Eduardo's worth $5 billion. He cut off all contact with me. He sent a legal restraining order that I could never speak to him again. He broke up with his girlfriend, because it was my wife's best friend at the time, and then ran to Singapore, never to be heard from again. Which... I understand, for $5 billion, none of you would ever speak to me again. I get that. My brother has said, for $5 billion, Ben, you're a nice brother, but that's a lot of money. So I understood, but I had nothing to go on, and I didn't have Eduardo talking to me anymore. So I basically locked myself in a hotel, and Aaron Sorkin came to Boston, and I would write a chapter and give it to Aaron, write a chapter and give it to Aaron, and I wrote the book in 11 weeks, and Aaron wrote the screenplay 3 more weeks. So in 14 weeks from start to finish, we had a book and movie written, and the movie came out 1 year later, which is completely
Extraordinary.
insane. Casey Sherman back there, wonderful writer, wonderful movies. He knows it's insane to have a movie get made in 1 year. It just doesn't happen. So that changed the course of how I write books, because I discovered that you could write a proposal, sell the movie, then sell the book, write the book while they make the movie, and this has been my process for 18 books since then. So every book I do, I write a 10 to 12 page proposal, I take it out to Hollywood. If I get a big movie offer, then I sell the book, then I write the book while a screenwriter is working with me, and the movie has a chance of happening much, much faster. And it's not for everybody, but it's something that has worked well for me, especially as the writing industry has changed and the Hollywood side of it has gotten so much stronger because of streamers, and the book side of it has gotten so much weaker. So this has been my process all along. And it's evolved, obviously, as things have changed. But yeah, this is how I do it.
I think it's really interesting. And in this morning, I don't know if any of you were in my conversation with Eric Larson. Was anyone here? Slightly different crowd. Oh, wow. Hi. Welcome back. He was talking about how difficult the process was, that he had some books that were optioned for a movie.
Yeah.
And it was, people who read it in high school were now full-grown adults, and he was still waiting for it to come out. And so we were talking last night about how you need this alignment of the actor.
Yeah, everything is about packaging right now. So the way it works is, if you have a great story and you can get an A-list actor and an A-list director and an A-list screenwriter, you have a greenlit movie. If you're missing any one of those elements, it ends up in this limbo of development that may or may not reach it. So those are kind of the things that you have to figure out how to get together. And it's gotten to the point now where the first phone calls you might get are from actors, which is a very different place than it was when I started out writing, which is when they would never speak to you, where the writer was the lowest person on the totem pole in Hollywood, just below the caterer. Now, you actually are involved in the sort of packaging process, but the business has changed dramatically, and everyone is kind of looking to put together something that Hollywood can't say no to. Because that's their entire job, is to say no. And they need to find any reason to say no, and they'll say no. So you need to make it so they can't say no, and that's how packaging works. So yeah.
And so I have to say that there's journalistically, you are very brave in terms of how you
brave is a very nice way of saying it. As someone who runs a newspaper, Linda, I have been called many things that were much worse than brave.
You're brave because you take on subjects that taking on Facebook is a big deal. I mean, that's like that's a really hard thing. And you've taken on other stories as well, where I remember we were in conversation about when you were taking on your Russian project, where we thought that this is we didn't use the word brave.
Right. It's a dangerous. So I wrote a book called Once a Time Upon in Russia that some of you might have read, about the Russian oligarchs who put Putin into power. And it's this incredible story where literally this group of oligarchs who are worth billions of dollars because they had been given the raw materials of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union tried to find someone that they could control. They found this low-level KGB agent in St. Petersburg who had helped one of them set up a car dealership, and his name was Vladimir Putin. They plucked him out of St. Petersburg, they put him into Moscow, and he put him as president, and 1 week later, he invited all the oligarchs to Stalin's old house. And it's a place where there are like bullet holes in the walls where they used to line people up and shoot them. And he sat the oligarchs down at his table, and he said, "You've all made billions of dollars. You can keep your money, but from here on out, you stay out of my way." And any oligarch who stayed out of Putin's way is still an oligarch today. Any oligarch who stood up to Putin fell down an elevator shaft or fell out of a second-story window. The character I wrote about, Boris Berezovsky, was found hanging in his bathroom from a scarf that Roman Abramovich had bought. And Roman Abramovich is now still a major oligarch. And so that story was one that normal me would never write because it's terrifying. And the way that story came about is a random phone call from a Hollywood director who was always pitching me like super dangerous stories. He would call me up and say, there's these gun runners in Miami. I want to go embed you with these gun runners. And I'd be like, well, how dangerous is it? And he goes, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like an 8. And I was like, I don't want an 8. I want like a 1. I'm the guy who goes to Vegas. And so one day he called me and he's like, I got this great story, best story of your career, but you need to go to London tomorrow. And I was like, well, what's the story? And he goes, I can't tell you because you'll never do it. And I was like, that's a horrible pitch. And he's like, just do it, I promise you. So I flew to London the next day, and I walked up to this bar. It was at a bar in a hotel, and there were all these security guys outside with guns and like earpieces, and I'm like, oh, what is this? And I walk in, and sitting at the bar is this very famous oligarch, who anybody who knows oligarchs would recognize. And I immediately thought, oh God, I don't want to do this story. I'm going to get killed. But they proceeded to tell me this wild story about how Putin had been discovered and created and built, and I just couldn't turn away. And so I spent a year hanging out with very scary Russian oligarchs, many, many times feared for my life. There's lots of stories. I don't know if you want to hear a couple of the scary stories. I was working, at one point I was in a room full of these Russians, and someone came up behind me and just stuck something into my pocket. And these are the people who had polonium poisoned people. So immediately I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna die. And the guy's like, don't look, don't look. And so I wasn't allowed to look. And I got home to the hotel and I took it out, and it was a computer memory stick. I had no idea what was on it. I didn't want to stick it in my computer. So I actually had a lawyer waiting in Boston in the airport, at Logan Airport, just in case I had something that the State Department was going to want. I flew back to Boston, and I put it in my computer, and it was 1,000 pages of depositions of Putin from when this polonium trial had happened, all of this secret stuff, no one knew anything about it, and somebody had wanted me to have it. And so the whole process of writing this book was like that. And one time, there's a scene in the book where Roman Abramovich and Boris Berezovsky wanted to buy an oil refinery. So they flew to Moscow, from Moscow to out in the Siberia. They went to this guy who owned an oil refinery, and they said, we would like to buy your oil refinery. And the guy laughed at them. He said, no. That night, he went swimming in the Irkutsk River and drowned. His only witness was his bodyguard, who got into a bar fight and died. So I write this scene, and I'm looking at it, and I call up the oligarch who told me the story, and I'm like, you know, this makes it sound like you had these men killed. And he's like, yes, it sounds that way. And great journalist that I am, Linda, I said, well, do you want me to change this? And they go, no, it's fine. And I was like, well, how is this fine? And they said, when you look at Russia in the 1990s, don't compare it to America in the 1990s. Compare it to America in the 1890s. And in the 1890s, if someone insulted you, you killed them. And so they were proud of these moments in their lives where they took out the competition. And that's what that book is full of, things like that. My wife can tell you, though, for a year after writing that book, anytime someone bumped into me, I was like, did I get poked with something? Or I wouldn't drink anything that had been left open. Like, I seriously thought I was going to be murdered. But I did hear that Putin had actually read the book and did not dislike it. Because he's a mobster and he didn't mind being portrayed that way. So yes, that was a book that I probably wouldn't write today.
And that book has been made into a
It's going to be Peter Morgan's next show after The Crown. It's already a play on Broadway.
It's a play. I
called
saw it in London. It's
Patriot.
fantastic.
And it is going to be, the Crown is done now, and they're making Once Upon a Time in Russia. I don't know if it'll be called Patriots or something else. So that'll be a cool show on Netflix starting next year.
I highly, highly recommend it. First, you should read the book and then see the play, of course.
Or either way, I don't care.
So I want to talk about your most recent book, Breaking Twitter.
Breaking Twitter.
And then we'll get into what's next.
Okay, so Breaking Twitter.
And then after that, I'm going to open it up to the crowd. If you guys have any questions, we can talk about anything you're interested in.
Yeah, I get I go from UFOs to oligarchs, so there's everything in the alphabet we can go through. So Breaking Twitter is the story of Elon's destructive path through Twitter. I know there are probably some people who like Elon and some people who don't. I would say that when I went into writing this book, I was an Elon fan. Previous to Twitter, he was the guy who was going to get us to Mars, making cars that drive themselves and are electric. He was all about making the world better and saving the planet and all of these great things. And then he walked into Twitter and became a totally different Elon.
With a sink.
With a sink, right. And the story that I wrote is about this spiral downward, that Elon didn't just break Twitter, but Twitter broke Elon. The Elon we see today is not the guy that Walter Isaacson would ever write a biography about. Walter denies this, but the reality is Walter wrote that biography because before Twitter, Elon was really one of the greatest men around. He was listed next to Einstein and Da Vinci as someone who was changing the world. But Elon today is hated by more than half the country, does things every day that are horrible, right? Everything from anti-Semitism all the way to sort of this destructive political move that Twitter is going in a direction that many of us probably don't like. And he did this trying to do the right thing throughout the process. And so in some ways, my book is not just an attack on Elon. It's really trying to understand what happened in those first 6 weeks at Twitter. And so, yeah, it's called Breaking Twitter. And we can go on, I can go on about it. I don't know what direction. I mean, really, what happened was he bought Twitter reluctantly. He wanted to buy Twitter because he felt like the ideal of free speech was being challenged. Conservative voices were being thrown off Twitter. He didn't like how the Babylon Bee had been kicked off for making an anti-trans joke. And all of his friends were egging him on, saying, you need to save Twitter. And his reason was he believes the entire world is a video game. And he really believes this. He believes we're living in a simulation, that he's player one, and his job is to get us to Mars. He created his Tesla company because we need to save the environment long enough to get us to Mars. He created SpaceX to create the spaceships to get us to Mars. And he believes that without a free speech town hall, Twitter, we're going to dive back into the dark ages and he won't be able to get us to Mars. It's all about getting to Mars. So he decided to buy Twitter. He made this crazy offer. It was way too much. And he realized that it was way too much because all of his Tesla people were yelling at him for trying to buy Twitter. So he changed his mind and said, I no longer want to buy Twitter. Twitter sued him and forced him to take the company because they were doing fiduciary duty to their shareholders. So he reluctantly was the barbarian at the gate. He came through the doors angry with that sink, fired 85% of everybody at Twitter angrily, trying to fire them with cause so they didn't have to pay anybody their bonuses or anything like that. And then he began to dismantle it. What happened was a series of events that had ended up driving him to a very bad place. First thing was there was the Paul Pelosi incident. If you remember, Paul Pelosi was attacked with a hammer-wielding crazy.
Nancy Pelosi's husband.
Right. And Elon immediately tweeted a conspiracy theory out about it, upsetting a lot of people, which he then erased and apologized for. That led to the next thing where he tried to change the blue check system. We all remember this. The blue check system on Twitter became a laughingstock as everyone started to fake being McDonald's or whatever they were. And that led to him going on stage with Chappelle. He got booed on stage, and that really affected him because it was the first moment in his life where he realized people didn't like him. He tweeted out a thing asking, should I remain CEO? And he fully expected most people to say yes. But the vast majority tweeted back, no. And this sent him into a spiral, and I write about this in the book. He ended up locked up in a room for 24 hours at Twitter, and the people who worked there were so concerned they were going to call in a wellness check with the San Francisco Police Department because they thought he was trying to kill himself. And that's where Elon ended up. He's not happy, and he's never really been happy, but it was this kind of moment where he realized that Twitter was taking him down. And then he lashed out, and Twitter became a very right-wing, inhospitable place because of his anger towards the world that he felt like was attacking him. Anyways, that's kind of the synopsis of the book. It's going to be a television show. We have a script already, and we're out to actors to play Elon. We're out to Ben Affleck right now to play Elon, which I think would be a good choice, but
He has that dark side.
we have a list. The way Hollywood works is you start it like Ben Affleck, and then you end up with the cast of Saved by the Bell. So you kind of work your way down, but we'll see where we end up with that one.
Okay, we have a great gentleman here with a microphone. What are you guys interested in talking about? Where do we want to go? Gentleman right up front.
Ben, as someone who used Clip Notes through college, I was wondering how, if you write a book in 3 months, like I mentioned I just finished Willie, how you do all that research in that amount of time. It's an incredible amount of research.
It's madness, I will say. So, I mean, like Dumb Money, if you've seen the movie Dumb Money, that kind of happened the same way. As I was sitting at home, and it was a Wednesday, and the GameStop started to go crazy, the stock. And if you know the story, there's this dude in his basement in Brockton, Mass., who ties a bandana on his head, who has all these posters of cats. And he just does this 8-hour live stream every day talking about how much he loves GameStop, and it sent 9 million crazy people on Reddit buying the stock, driving it to the most valuable company in the world. So anyways, that story was happening on a Wednesday. That night, I wrote a proposal. So I didn't know if I had any sources yet. It goes out to Hollywood. We have a huge auction. I sell the movie by Friday. I sell the book on Monday, and then I dive into the research. And the way the research works for me is literally pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic, as we're calling it. I like to go and be with all the people. So I meet with all of the characters. I spend as much time with them as I can. I download their stories into sort of, my brain as much as I can. And then I lock myself up. I write an outline. So the outline is the most vicious part of my writing process. The outline takes a few weeks to write. But when I've got a solid outline, I'm off to the races. So my research really is talking to all the characters, getting as much from them as I can, and then I dive in and I write 6 to 10 pages a day until I'm done with the book. And in 30 days you have a book if you write at that pace. So it's not for everyone. I don't recommend, I know there's a lot of writers in the room, and I think everyone has their own process. For me, I have to write quickly or I will lose the thread. I need that explosion. I need that energy. I need to go fast. And it probably goes back to that year when I basically was told you either make it in a year or you don't. And I just feel that desperation through the whole process. I'm not saying it's fun, but I am saying that it works for me, and it's just all about sort of not stopping. I always tell young writers to watch The Terminator, and there's a scene where I think it's Sarah Connor explains, or somebody explains to Sarah Connor what a Terminator is. And it's like, this is what he does. This is all he does. And he will not stop. And that's how I look at it when I'm writing, is I'm literally just this monster. And Tanya can tell you more. You maybe should interview her about this question, but it's not a pleasant thing to watch, but it's how I do it. So yeah.
With 90s movie energy.
Yeah, 90s movie energy. Yeah. Oh, I think. Oh, sorry.
Over here first, and then over here.
So Ben, I think you said you have 2 children. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're right here. Yeah.
9 and 11. So the kids are here.
14 and 12. 13.
14 and 12. Okay.
12. Sorry, 12 and 14. 12 and
It changes
14.
every year, Art.
Yeah.
So my question for you is,
Yeah.
if you sat your kids down
Yeah.
and based on everything you've written about,
Yeah.
what would you tell them right now about, here's what you need to know about how the world works?
Oh, gosh.
Question.
Wow.
Great question.
That's a great question. Well, I'm a very happy and positive person, and I've been very lucky and blessed that, I dreamed about being a writer since I was 12 years old, and this is what I do for a living. And I kick myself every day that I've somehow, and the industry has changed so much, and everything about how we consume stories has changed so much that the fact that I've continued this far is amazing to me. But I'm very positive. I think if you find something that you love to do, you can have a really wonderful life doing it. And
No,
you
I think
just
the
have
question
to.
is like, what did you learn from the people?
Oh, well, I will say.
You're fascinating, Ben. but
Yeah, I would say from
characters.
people that I've written about, I think the key is to take massive chances, to not be so concerned about, well, this is not a great lesson, but not be so concerned about rules if you're doing what you think is right, and if you're attempting to sort of change the world in good ways, to get there you often have to sort of be different and take sort of chances and risks that nobody else will take. I will say that there are a lot of weirdness in the world, a lot of conspiracies, a lot of kind of things that are set up against you. So you have to work hard, harder than everyone else to get there. And I think all of the characters I write about are crazy to the extent that they have something they're passionate about and refuse to stop whatever it is they're doing. So I guess I see myself in the characters in that way.
Also Terminators.
Yeah.
Question over here. That's a great question.
I have 2 questions. One is, did you get to interview Elon Musk? And
Yeah.
then the second question is, of all the people that you've interviewed since you began writing, who remains, beloved in your heart?
Beloved. Well, I love the Winklevi twins. I mean, you can't, no, I do, they're wonderful. But I would say, Elon, first of all, I have spoken to Elon, but he did not sit for an interview with me. He was not thrilled that I was doing this book. And
Because he was doing Walter Isaac's book
Walter
at the
Isaacson
same
was
time.
his book that he sort of authorized and said, write this book, and was not did not want me to tell this particular story, similar to how Zuckerberg did not want me to tell the Facebook story. And honestly, when you interview someone like a Zuckerberg or an Elon, you know what they're going to say before you interview them. It's the same interview over and over again, because they say, I built Facebook. Yeah, I built Tesla. Yeah, I'm doing a wonderful job at Twitter. That's the interview. And that doesn't get you anywhere. And you usually get a lot more by interviewing the people around them. I know this is kind of anti-journal, the way newspapers do things, but the reality is I've always said the worst person to get a story from is the main character in the story. Because that's the person who has a reason to tell you the story they want you to tell. And honestly, over and over again, we read books where it's the main character saying exactly what you expect him to say, and it's boring. You want to hear the guy who got screwed. You want to hear the people who have a reason to tell you the actual story of what happened. And so that's usually what I look for. And what was the second part of the question? Was my favorite character. I mean, I always loved the MIT kids. They were just a bunch of kids going to Vegas.
You became friends with them.
Yeah, I became very good friends with them. You know, they're carrying sacks of money, you know, duffel bags with $1 million in cash, running to Vegas every weekend. That's fun, and it's exciting. I had a great time writing that story. George Church, I wrote this book, Wooly, about George Church's, you know, changing the world and his lab and what he's been doing with the woolly mammoth, bringing it back to life.
And a person from his lab is the one who's doing the Mice Against Ticks program.
In Nantucket.
In Nantucket.
Yeah, they had a meeting here, and I believe that project is still going on.
I think it's not dead. I
Not
think
dead.
that they're having a trouble with
Yeah, so I would say
bringing
George
up-
Church is one of the most fascinating people that I've hung out with, and I love George, and he's, you know, the 6'5", like, looks like God, you know, the gray hair and the gray beard, and just a wonderful person who wants to save the world.
George Church is a really, really one of the most interesting people out there. And one of the things that's really interesting is that he is narcoleptic. And he views this as a feature, not a bug. So he can't drive because there's a risk of him falling asleep.
Right.
He can't. But we would have dinner with him, and then he would sort of just
Fall asleep.
and then wake up and go right back to where it was. And he views it as something that really is.
Yeah, I mean, I would do interviews with George, and I'd show up at a radio station, and I'd find him fast asleep in the lobby, and I'm like, they have no idea that the greatest geneticist of our time is passed out in their lobby, and you'd wake him up and he'd start the interview, and he's just a special person. So if you haven't read my book, Wooly, he's just an awesome guy, and it's worth worrying about. Yeah.
In the back.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at your relationship with Hollywood, because it's the absolute opposite of every author I've ever heard. Most can't say enough negative things about it.
Yeah.
Is there a secret? Do you somehow get a veto if they totally screw up your story? You can say no? Because every other author says they've screwed up.
I know. Listen, one day someone will make a bad movie off of one of my books. I have been very fortunate. The only real power you have as an author is who you sell it to. Once you sell that project, and even though you're still a producer usually, and even though you're still a consultant usually, you've lost most of the power to the director, and if the star is big enough, the star. The screenwriters will work with you for the most part. Even an Aaron Sorkin, who is just beyond genius, will rely on you for a lot of things. So you have some control at the screenplay level. I will say my relationship with Hollywood was very strategic. From the very beginning, I knew this is what I wanted to do. So I had a book agent. I immediately got a Hollywood agent who was separate, who would be my person in Hollywood. I never looked at it as the book would then turn into a movie. I looked at it as this story will be a book and movie. So I would go out to LA and meet with all the producers and meet with all the actors and meet with the directors and want to sell it to the right people every time. And I just looked at it as one and the same. A lot of authors go into it, write a book, and then wait for their agent to sell the movie. And I just think it puts you a little bit in a weaker position. I will say, I mean, I was lucky in that 21 became a big movie. The Social Network became a culturally changing movie, placed me in a position where everyone wanted the next Social Network, so I had a lot more power. But there's a lot of luck involved, but it's also strategic in that I always looked at it as part of the business. And it's tough. I mean, there are authors who are doing it well, and I would say Casey and Dave are two authors who are doing it phenomenally well. But it is tricky, and you have to be understanding that Hollywood's job is different than the publishing job. They don't care so much about the book as they do about the IP, and you have to understand that what they're trying to do is create a project that nobody can say no to. So you need to help them get there. But yes, I've been very fortunate, and that's why I have a good relationship in Hollywood. The first people who see my 12-page proposal are a list of about 8 producers who I've worked with on lots of other projects, and my mom. and Tanya, of course, has helped me write it. But it's a process where you have to go into it with your eyes open and understand what it is they're trying to do. But yes, I understand why. Look, there's been a lot of bad movies made out of books, and sooner or later, you do lose control. But if you pick a David Fincher, if you can get some great actor attached, you know that it's going to be at least somewhat good.
I'm going to take the final question and just ask what is your next project that we're going to see?
Yeah, I just sold a big movie and book called Checkmate about the chess scandal where Magnus Carlsen, the greatest chess player in the world, sat down against a 19-year-old nobody, and the kid beat him while chewing gum, not paying attention at the biggest chess championship in the US, and Magnus accused this kid of cheating. It became this huge scandal. And it's a really intriguing story about how technology has changed the game of chess, how the greatest chess player in the world can be beat by a 12-year-old now if the kid has an iPhone, and how does the world look in a world where computers are now smarter than people. And so many people over the last year have been like, are you going to write about AI? Are you going to write about AI? And I was like, I don't know what to write about AI. And then I saw this story, and I was like, that's how you write about AI. And so the book is called Checkmate. Emma Stone is producing it, and hopefully going to star in it. Nathan Fielder, who works with Emma on The Curse and a couple other shows, is writing and directing. I sold this on a 12-page proposal about 3 weeks ago, and I'm deep into it now, and I'll have the book the book will come out next year. I'm also working on a story about Jeffrey Kent, who created the photographic safari. If any of you know Abercrombie and Kent, it's this incredible safari company where he changed it from hunting to photography. So he's trying to save the world through safaris. And then Breaking, Twitter, Once Upon a Time in Russia, and my book 7 Wonders are all being made into television shows right now. And Wooly, Checkmate, and I'm forgetting, are being made into movies right now. And my new book coming out this October is my sequel to the book Midnight Ride, which I don't know if any of you know this story. I did a serialized novella for the Boston Globe. Linda was wonderful in helping this happen. It was a novella that's kind of like a Da Vinci Code type story that ran for 2 weeks.
So this was during the pandemic, and we were writing a lot of bad news, a lot of scary news, and we thought that we would go back to the old Charles Dickens.
It was unbelievable, and it was so wonderful. So many fans were excited about it. I mean, we did a Zoom call, and there was like 1,000 people on the Zoom call. And so I was writing this story as a Da Vinci Code style thriller, but was handing in a chapter a day for 20 days. So we really wrote a book in 20 days. And then I turned it into a novel called The Midnight Ride, which came out last year. And the sequel, The Mistress and the Key, comes out in October. And I sold it to Steven Spielberg and DreamWorks, so we're working on that. And
great story.
I'm hoping we run it in the Globe again.
Yes.
It would be amazing. And that was an incredible experience for me because I'd always wanted to write like a Da Vinci Code type book. And when you called me up, you were like, do you want to, the editor, Brian, and you were, do you want to do this? And I said, well, only if I can write not nonfiction, fiction. And you let me do something that I really wanted to do. And so that I'm working on as well, and as a movie as well.
How prolific you are is just inspiring. You've created your own genre, you've created your own style in a way that is just very cool and readable, and your books are fun reads. Because you've developed this style, I know why Hollywood loves him is because he writes in a way that they can easily adapt. You make it very easy for them because you're thinking in terms of when he writes, you see the scene lay out, and you can see a director saying like getting what that scene is. So
thank you, Linda.
Thank you for telling these stories. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the Nantucket Book Foundation.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.